So without further ado, I'll let the speakers introduce themselves and we'll get going. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate it. So my name is Sean Hope. I'm the Director of Managed Print Services here at Usherwood. I've been with the company for about 7 years, but been in the industry for about 20 years, working in various channels with both manufacturers and private companies involved with managed print services really throughout the entire last 2 decades. And I'm excited for this conversation today because I really believe it's incumbent upon those of us in the industry to help raise awareness about the issues related to printers and printer security. So that's our goal today, is really just informational, raise awareness, so share the knowledge. And with that, I'll let Laura Brady introduce herself.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm happy to be with you today. I'm sorry that David couldn't be here. I know he really wanted to talk this topic with you today, but hopefully I can do him some justice. I have been here at HP for 5 years in a technical consultant role at HP. I have, like Sean, been in the industry, I'll just say over 20 years, dating myself, but happy to cover this important topic with you on why printer security is so important in today's day and age.
Great. Well, thank you, Laura. And so I think to kind of get the conversation rolling, I think it's important to talk about why this is an issue. So in the last several years, there have been warnings from, the federal government, from private companies. There's Microsoft, you name it, all about, IoT devices, Internet of Things devices being used in cyber attack campaigns, and specifically printers as part of that IoT universe. Can you talk a little bit about how hackers have used printers in their campaigns?
Absolutely. So yes, this is a problem that's become more and more prevalent just by having an Internet of Things, or as Sean said, an IoT device. It's an endpoint on your network, and really every endpoint on your network needs to be as hard as the next one. So whether it's the network infrastructure, whether it's a printer, whether it's a laptop, all of those things need to be as difficult to penetrate as possible. There have been many printer hacks. You can Google and see what's been happening. There was a pretty prominent one this year. It was actually in March of this year. It's a Newsweek article. You guys can go out and look at it. But the hacking collective Anonymous actually claimed to have hacked unsecured printers in Russia to spread anti-propaganda messages about the war in Ukraine. And they actually tweeted that they had been able to, within 2 hours, print over 100,000 plus copies on the tweet, and this was just as it was just beginning. So they were advertising the fact that they were using printers to actually spread this message out far and wide and be able to get around things. So think about, printers are an endpoint. They need to be hardened as much as the next technology, but the key is they use printers to get a foothold on your network, to get around the firewall, to be able to make, whatever ransomware, whatever they're looking for, they can use printers to do that if printers are not properly set up and have the right protections built in.
Thank you. Yes. And I think it's interesting to talk about some of the examples of where we've seen printers used in campaigns. And in that instance with the anonymous hacktivist group, it was private citizens, but there's also a lot of government backed activity around that. So like going back over the last decade, sometimes you may hear about hacks and not even realize that printers have been involved with them. I think some of the most prominent ones that people may have heard of was involves the North Korean government. The Lazarus Group is a group from North Korea. They were involved with the Sony hack, if people remember that. That was when Seth Rogen had the movie The Interview that was offensive to the North Korean regime. And they built up a pressure campaign to try and get Sony to not release the picture. And one of the things they did was they did a denial of service attack on all of their printers and MFPs at Sony. So it really brought their business to its knees. Ultimately, obviously, it was successful because they didn't release it. And that same group also, they robbed the Bank of Bangladesh. They disabled a printer connected to the SWIFT terminal that printed out receipts. So when they did phony transfer requests from the Federal Bank of New York, by hacking the printer, they were able to get away with it and transfer $81 million. Are there any other more recent instances that you can reference that may have happened with printers and hacks?
Certainly, the ones you mentioned, the anonymous one. There's also there was one here in the Northeast that actually targeted a whole bunch of college campuses where there were hate flyers spread out and sent out across the campus. I think it involved a bunch of high-profile campuses here, and the police and FBI were alerted. The hacker had claimed to identify 29,000 internet-connected printers in 60 seconds through an open port that was available. So there are many, many examples. There are lots that we can talk about that really were covered by NDA on a lot of them. But the message is that really, if it's hanging on your network, it needs to be as hardened as possible so that you can prevent these kind of attacks from happening inside your own company.
Yeah, and I think there was for me, we've talked about our years of experience in the industry, and I think one of the eye-opening moments for me was from 2019 when there was the DEF CON 19 conference, tech conference, and one of the demonstrations was how you could hack a printer even securely behind a firewall. And so that was a bit of a game changer of, hey, this is serious. And the idea of supply chain attacks has become a very common, increasingly common methodology because it's a great way to get past firewalls, like we were just talking about. Can you talk about how printers can be suspect to supply chain attacks?
Yes, absolutely. So today's printers come with actually a chip in them, and that particular chip, at least the way we have it in our manufacturing, we have an end-to-end supply chain to ensure that we know where every component and product comes from, that if it's incorporated into our products, that the supply chain is fully protected. However, when you're using something like a compatible toner, the compatible toner could have an unknown chip, a chip of unknown origin, and that particular chip could introduce something that is inserted into the printer. So once again, the printer's already behind your firewall. So if you're inserting this new compatible toner that's got an unknown chip, we have seen vulnerabilities happen with these third-party cartridges using these unknown chips. So it is something to consider, and it's definitely within the supply chain. If it's not fully protected, if it's not 100% end-to-end, you can end up with exploits and vulnerabilities from within your own network by using a compatible supply cartridge.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting. There was just a couple of months ago, I believe there was a white hat hacker, found a vulnerability. And what I thought was interesting was that it was the nature of the chip in a toner cartridge. The OEM chips, at least with HP, are one time, they can't be rewritten. But the compatible toner, the chips used in compatible toner cartridges by nature can be rewritten, and that's why they were able to inject malware by corrupting the chip in a compatible. And they tried it with the OEM, and they were unsuccessful. And so I think that's a real interesting example of that.
Absolutely.
Yep. And we talk about ways to protect organizations. So I know, like last year, the NSA issued a bulletin entitled "Embracing Zero Trust Environment," and the principles of a zero trust security environment are really kind of what they say in the title: zero trust. You don't trust anything. It's designed to help prevent lateral movement within networks by authenticating and really trying to minimize damage when a breach does happen. However, the NSA also acknowledged that shifting to a zero trust environment is very difficult. It's not a quick fix. It's not for the faint of heart, if you will, because it takes a lot of effort to get there. But they do suggest trying to begin to embrace the principles of zero trust where you can. Can you talk a little bit about how you might be able to embrace the principles of zero trust when it talks about printer security?
Absolutely. And Sean, it really has to do with firmware patching and being able to keep your devices really up to date and up to speed. So zero trust, just like you said, it means that the network's not going to trust anything or anyone, and it has to deal with knowing that the device that is connected to its network is trusted. So one of the ways we can do that is by keeping up to date on firmware patching. HP keeps a website on our support site of all of our security patches and actually known vulnerabilities like the one you just spoke about with the chip exploit. You know, we have a bug bounty, so we know when someone's tried or successfully has breached one of our technologies. And we keep regularly a database of updated firmware. So one of the ways that organizations, if they have some kind of patch management process in place to actually keep their devices up to the latest and greatest code, will be protecting themselves and will be getting themselves closer to that zero trust environment you talked about.
Yeah, and when I've read about zero trust, one of the things it talks about is patching, apply security patches as they come out, and really, I think that's one of the areas that when we talk about printer security, what's really been changing in this world is that's not something that people have really put into their best practices previously, because printers have been in the office environment longer than anybody's been talking about ransomware and things like that. So the idea of incorporating printers into your cybersecurity strategy and into your standard operating procedures around applying patches and things like that, it just really hasn't been part of most organizations' path. And so it's not that people are being asleep at the wheel or anything like that. That's why we're trying to raise awareness about this. Is these are some of the things that it's important to develop a strategy, a process around doing that. And as we talk about security, you talk about print in general. The traditionally buying decisions have focused on operating cost, acquisition cost, functionality, the typical sorts of things. But now, as we're seeing this world changing around us, and we're trying to put security in the forefront of everything, and acknowledging that we need to be doing this with the printers as well. I think it's important for people to understand that there are differences in built-in security based on not just by different manufacturers, but by product classes within a manufacturer. So if you can, just as an example, again, our goal is to raise awareness. This is not meant to be an advertisement, just as raising awareness as an example. HP's main two platforms, they have the Pro series and the Enterprise class series. And there's different security features built into the two different ones. Can you talk to the differences about those security features just to help people get an understanding of what's out there?
Absolutely. So there are, as Sean mentioned, at least in the office space, where we're dealing with the Pro class of printers and the Enterprise class of printers. I think it's important to know that both classes do have security built in. However, the Enterprise class really has the most security built in, and the key with the Enterprise device is it's got embedded hardware security features, so nothing that needs to be added on after the fact. But the key is that it's constantly looking for what we call runtime intrusion detection, or constantly looking for any kind of anomalies in memory when a device is printing. So if you think about what the printer's looking for in a normal print job, the memory looks a specific way. When malware is injected into the device, whether it came from the print stream or however it got into the device, it looks very different than a print job. And so when the device actually sees that, it can actually not only give a security alert to who's ever monitoring the printers, but it will shut itself down and bring itself back from a golden copy of the BIOS on the enterprise printers. And really what that all means to you is cyber resilience. So the machine brings itself back from a vulnerability or a hack that happened inside of it, where the pro devices will alert you, but will remain in a state that is going to need some IT intervention. So the cyber resiliency, the ability to heal, self-heal from an attack, is really what makes the difference. And within our latest introduction of firmware, we've introduced something called Memory Shield, which actually takes that runtime intrusion and takes it to another level, in that it actually gives the ability to actually look for 0-day attacks, which those attacks are attacks that, you know, when you're talking about antivirus, anti-malware definitions that are within those softwares, typically known viruses, typically things that are known. What a 0-day attack is something that's never been seen before. So it can take the ability of that runtime intrusion detection, not just from print, but within other functions inside the MFP, and be able to look for things that are anomalies in those processes as well. So we're really just trying to, with our firmware, with the security measures in place, give some peace of mind that when you're using enterprise, you've got the most hardened piece of printing or multifunction products that are out there.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to note, you know, you talk about those two differences, and going back to the toner cartridge, you know, when I read that bulletin on the compatible toner cartridge being hacked with malware, the models that were vulnerable to that were all Pro Series models, not Enterprise class. In fact, there was the Pro 400 series. The current Pro 400 series was vulnerable to that, and there's an Enterprise class version of that machine with the same print engine, and the only difference is the security features. So there's a great example of the security features of the Enterprise class protected it versus what was available in the Pro series, which is, it's not bad, but it's not quite the same level as the Enterprise class. And then as we talk about the differences in the security of what's available out there in the marketplace today, obviously these are the current technology. But as everybody has printers in their environment that aren't new, so when we look at the security features of what's available today, how does that compare with what may have been available, what people might have in their networks today of devices that are 5, 7, 10 years old?
Right, and technology is ever evolving. I'm sure anybody with an iPhone gets your updates, and there's a lot that needs to be updated, and think about Windows XP in 2013. Would you want to be running that on your network today? Well, if you're running printers from 2013, you might be running into security related issues with your printers. And I use that date because that's the date that HP started introducing some security printers and printing as technology has evolved, and we started seeing cybersecurity becoming an issue on the PC side. We noted that hey, we've got endpoints on the network on the print side that need to be addressed as well. So we about 5 years ago started introducing the protections and the hardware protections I just talked about in the Enterprise series about 2017. So if you have devices that are older than that, and trust me, I've gone out and done print assessments. I know that there are still printers from 20 years ago out there, but those devices don't have any protections built into them. So it's really important to kind of look at not only that patching strategy, but looking at the age of the devices that you have, because there are some devices that cannot be flashed with firmware to make them as secure as some of the products from 2017 and up. So it's really a consideration as you're looking at, patch management and your fleet and how secure your printing environment is.
Yeah, and as we talk about older technology. You mentioned like Microsoft retiring Windows 7 because they stopped supporting that. So, HP eventually, doesn't support for firmware every device forever. I know in the past, we talked about when devices would go to end of support for service, people would really be thinking about, the manufacturing of service parts and things like that, but that applies to firmware support too, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a certain level we'll go up to, and then there's an end of support on that device. So you want to keep that in mind in your strategies.
Right, because when they talk about going back to the NSA talking about embracing the principles of zero trust, and making sure that not only you are applying patches when something's not supported for firmware support patches anymore, then it becomes to the point where it really ought to be retired from the network, just from a basic security hygiene standpoint, correct?
Absolutely. Yep. No doubt.
Gotcha. Cool. And so as we're talking about firmware, and obviously this is a big deal in the security planning here. One of the things that everyone who attended this call is eligible for is what we call a firmware assessment. So it's in partnership with Usherwood and HP. HP has a tool called the firmware assessment tool, and what we're able to do with that is pull a report of the firmware level of all your HP devices that are on your network, cross-reference that with HP's database of firmware for see whether they're current, up to date, whether they're how many revisions they're out of date, what vulnerabilities people are exposed to currently, because ultimately, the thrust of this conversation is to try and make sure people are, as we said, aware that it's important to put printers into your cybersecurity strategy. And in order to develop a strategy, it's pretty darn important to understand where you are today, right? And so that assessment just helps begin to paint a picture of the building blocks of where you are today. So there'll be a survey coming out later that if you're interested in that, we can do that for you. And we talked about patch management, and what would you consider some of the best practices of patch management process, and really what are some of the challenges that people may have out there?
Yes. So the challenges, especially if you have, a number of printers out there in your fleet, the way to really go about patching those devices, is kind of a one-to-one kind of scenario where you would have to, first of all, subscribe to our support site to know when there is a new firmware that has been released and what it addresses. You'd have to download that and then individually go, device by device and update the firmware. I mean, it can be done, with the embedded web server of the device. You could put it on a thumb drive and send people around, but it's not a really easy process to kind of embrace, which I think leads to why, a lot of printers are not actually kept up to date on their firmware. I think, running a firmware assessment tool, you'd probably be surprised at the level of firmware and end of support products you may have within your own fleet. So what we do is we arm Usherwood with tools to kind of help with this, because there isn't really a great way as an end user to be able to go out and do it. It can be done. It's just a little tedious, and it is something that you would need to kind of take on and be pretty religious about, on an ongoing basis, looking for the updates and then being able to get the patches and upgrades done.
Gotcha. And as we talk about best practices, obviously we're talking about patch management, but I'm sure there are other best practices that people should be keeping in mind with their printers in general. Set things about like settings or passwords and things like that. Is there any advice you can provide, just as best practice mental note type thing?
Sure. There actually is a white paper we can share that actually does include what we recommend in terms of locking down your devices. When you get a brand new HP printer, or an enterprise printer, there are up to 250 different network settings that can be set. And we actually do have a white paper that suggests what ports and protocols that should be left open or closed depending upon what kind of workflows you have in your environment. But we do have some recommendations in terms of what you can absolutely lock down. Obviously, use unique administrator passwords. Some of the hacks we have seen out there have been because manufacturers sometimes publish that administrator password if one comes from the factory. So you could just Google, what an administrator password is for a certain device. And I was talking to Sean the other day about, the Target hack where all of that retail credit card information got stolen was because the HVAC system that they had, their heat and air system, basically was using an administrator password, and someone was able to Google that, and Target IT did not change the password on the HVAC system. So it's very simple things, but things that you really want to think about when you think about your printers. The way HP printers ship is we ship with no password because we want you to set it. We want you to be able to go out there and create your own unique password. So, having the firmware patching, having some kind of strategy on older devices, and certainly setting those administrator passwords along with, a white paper we can share, then we could absolutely help with that.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you talk about administrative passwords just being out there, and that goes back to one of the other to me bellwether events, raising awareness about security. I mentioned DEF CON 19, but also in 2019, Microsoft issued a warning about IoT devices, and specifically printers was one of 3 types of IoT devices that they saw a Russian hacking group had been targeting. And really the whole point was they were targeting it as looking for weak links in the chain. That they always say a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And part of what they talked about was that these IoT devices like printers and a VoIP phone and a video camera, because they're not typically strategized on, they're not part of that corporate security strategy from a cyber standpoint. A lot of them would have like default passwords, so it's very easy for them to hack into those, corrupt those. Again, just looking for the easiest way to get in and gain a foothold, and then move laterally and steal things like use Active Directory to steal credentials. Because in so many of these hacks, it's not that the printer is the end game, the end goal. It's really more of a tool within their strategy to get to the next level. So in fact, talking about that group that Microsoft warned about, these are heavy hitters. These are the same people that hacked into the 2016 Democratic National Committee during the presidential campaign and things like that. They were also been involved with some of the Kaseya hack over this past summer with malware in the supply chain. So they're exactly the sort of thing that we're all trying to warn against. But yeah, those are some of the big events to me that brought this forward. Because when Microsoft warned about that, to me that took it from a theoretical with white hat researchers and things like that saying this could be done to actual evidence. Okay, wow, this is actually really happening, and this is really happening by some serious people who are serious bad actors. You look at we say the Russian intelligence, North Korean intelligence. It's all pretty scary out there, and the reality is some of these people are using these for ransomware attacks for profit, but then there's other entities out there that are just doing it for cyber espionage. So certainly, depending on what your industry you're in, your intellectual property that goes through your printers is another thing that to be mindful of, because one of the methodologies that they can use is to have copies of everything that you send through your printer sent to them. So you talk about military, industrial stuff like that, really secure stuff. And even, hey, maybe if you're in the legal market and somebody is trying to steal your evidence, that sort of thing. But so there's more than one way they can be used, and they're being targeted frequently.
Absolutely.
Yes. So Lindsay, I think we're coming up on the time to transition towards our Q&A section, if I'm not mistaken.
You are 3 minutes early, but yes, so
Oh.
feel free if there's anything you wanted to wrap up with, and then we can do some Q&A.
Cool. Yeah, so as I said, you'll be getting a survey later after this, and one of the things we'll put in there is whether or not you want that firmware assessment. It's very simple, doesn't take much time for us to do it, and it's just a nice little window into what's going on, just to help you kind of build that building block of to create a strategy. And certainly, as I was saying earlier, talking about understanding what's in your fleet today, not only whether it's up to date on the firmware, looking at the age of the equipment to get an idea of what kind of security might be built into that, or more realistically, what kind of security isn't built into that. And that's obviously it's going to vary by manufacturer, it's going to vary by model, but these are all the things that we're trying to get people to think more about and take a look at. And obviously, we're happy to help people do that. But just paying attention to this as a priority and not just as a transactional commodity of the printers that they used to be, perhaps.
So Sean, I have one question as a follow-up. Could you maybe walk us through what a print security assessment would look like? What type of commitment is it? Is it going to take a whole day? So you just kind of explain for the audience a little bit what that could look like.
Yeah, so the basic assessment that we're talking about here, it's a very light lift. It's all done remotely. Basically, we send you an installer. You install something on your server, and it kind of does a ping of all of the printers in your environment, and that ping will give us back a report that includes the firmware level. And so that's really where we begin this. It's really from the customer side. It takes maybe 15 minutes to set up that installer, and then we'll analyze the information and be able to get back to you within the next day or something like that usually, and just really kind of we use like a red, yellow, green coding for each device. So the green would be something that is up to date with its firmware and it's still supported. So that's a good okay is what we would call that. The yellow is a device that is still supported by the manufacturer, in this case, obviously HP, but is not up to date with its firmware and has known vulnerabilities that patches are available for, but haven't been applied. So yellow is a little, it's an alert, but there's something you can do about it. All right. Now, the red, on the other hand, the red category, those are the ones that are no longer supported for patching. So whether there was a known vulnerabilities at the time that they went end of support or not, there really should be considered vulnerabilities at that point once they're not supported for patching by the manufacturer. So those ones, the red category, we call those should be retired. And I want to specify, I say the word retired. I'm not saying replaced because just because you retire a device doesn't mean you need to replace it. You talk about security strategies, and one of the best practices, hey, the fewer network endpoints you have, the fewer things there are to protect. So, when you have a printer fleet of 100 devices and 50 of them, maybe if you've been really clinging on to those assets, maybe 50 of them are old and not supported anymore. Yeah, those 50 should really be retired from your network, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need 50 new printers. Obviously workflows change and things like that. So whether you replace it or not, retiring those devices that we would call it in the red category, that's really what part of the emphasis.
Awesome. And then a follow-up question to that would be, is there a cost for the firmware assessment?
Nope. For everybody attending here today, we appreciate you taking the time to join us because we do believe this is a very important topic, and so we're happy to do that as an informational. Thank you for attending, and certainly with that information, we would be happy to discuss whether there's any suggestions, recommendations that we have for your particular environment from a long-term strategy standpoint, both as far as the hardware that you have, and then talking about practices so that you can develop a patch management strategy, whether that's independently or with support from us and HP.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
We have a question from Jennifer for the group is, what do you recommend for disposing of old printers? I assume there's a hard drive of sorts that may have confidential information on it.
So Laura, from a HP best practice standpoint, people talk about hard drives and there's maybe the difference with MFPs or printers. Can you talk to the details on that?
Absolutely. And once again, depending upon the age of your devices, it kind of varies. The devices that ship today come with an encrypted hard drive. So there's peace of mind that it's being overwritten and encrypted kind of by default. But when you are actually returning old devices and you want to actually kind of sanitize that drive, we do have in the enterprise printers, there is a way you can do what's called a secure sanitize erase, and it is compliant to the Department of Defense security protocol that would absolutely kind of take anything that was left on that hard drive and sanitize, erase, and it takes a little bit for it to happen, but for your devices that are going out is absolutely recommended. I know that there are, other third-party companies, and I'm not sure what Usherwood would do for this practice. You may have something, but there, you could actually destroy hard drives. Sometimes people just will destroy a hard drive and give the hard drive back to a customer just to prove that that particular hard drive was indeed rendered not useful. So there are different ways to do it. What we recommend is that doing the secure sanitize erase, like I said, it's up to Department of Defense standards for the way you dispose of technology. So.
Yeah, and I think that's an area that, you talk about, we're raising awareness about cybersecurity today, and the issue about hard drive security, that probably came up maybe like in 2010, I think it was, there was a episode on CBS, I think it was 2020, where they went into some MFPs had been returned that off lease, and they went and found them in some New Jersey warehouse, and they hacked right into the MFP and were able to access the hard drive. So there was there was a device from the Buffalo Police Department. So they were able to get information off the hard drive of people's arrest records and things like that. And I think that's one of the things when you talk about security in this industry. At that time, some manufacturers had already worked on encrypting hard drives and image overwrite on their hard drives, and some hadn't, or had it as just an optional extra that people weren't really often aware of. And that's, as we evolve in our industry, that's one of the things that now has become a standard in protecting those hard drives and encrypting them. And that's when we talk about, again, our goal here today, raising awareness. I view this as like kind of the next wave of security consciousness within the print industry, so that hopefully 5-10 years from now we'll be talking about, oh, remember when this stuff happened, and now where you do this, and everybody's much better positioned for it.
Awesome. Thank you both for that in-depth answer. We have, I believe, 2 more questions. This question is from Christopher. What risks are introduced by SNMP v1/2 and the managed printer monitoring that communicates with the internet?
Well, I will have to defer to Laura on the technical aspect of that. And meanwhile, I'm actually going to pull an improv if we like. I'm getting an IM from one of our people, Dan Hernborg, who is one of our managed IT security specialists, who has his 2 thoughts on that. So if Dan's interested, Becky, do you want to make Dan to present to answer this question?
Well, while we're waiting for him to get on, maybe I'll go to the next question, and that'll buy us some time, Christopher, for your technical question. So I'll read the next question from Jamie. Does your complementary firmware assessment apply to only HP print devices, or will it cover other manufacturers?
So it's really only HP and actually Samsung, because HP bought Samsung a few years back. Because the way it works is when it pulls the firmware reading off the device, and they have a database that it references. So obviously their database is certainly it's an HP database, and because they bought Samsung, HP has the Samsung database of all the different firmware versions. So that's what's able to reference back to what how many versions it's out of date, and what vulnerabilities there are for those. In a perfect world, I would love to be able to tell you we have a tool that could do that for every manufacturer under the sun, and I've been asking around for one, but so far I haven't heard anybody say that they have something like that. So it's as this continues to evolve, because again, we're talking about this is an emerging issue that has been identified. I would imagine that at some point in the next few years, there will be something that exists like that. But as of right now, we don't have that. So we're constantly working on improving and evolving our own offerings. And hey, the world keeps changing, technology keeps changing. So we're doing our best to stay on the leading edge with that.
Awesome. So Jamie, if you don't have HP printers, oh, there you go. Definitely encourage you to reach out to your sales rep, and maybe there's some kind of workaround we can do for you to kind of get you a little bit more information on your printers that are not HP. And I've just been informed that Dan Hermborg is on the line. So Dan, if you want to answer Christopher's question, I'll reread the question, and then Dan, you can pop in. What risks are introduced by SNMP version 1/2 in the managed printer monitoring that communicates with the internet?
Great question. I'm glad somebody asked about SNMP. SNMP version 1 and 2 are non-encrypted versions of passing messages across your network. Our print assessment tool allows for an encrypted SNMP3. It just takes a little bit of extra, configuration, but it is encrypted at SNMP3. So if your device is capable of SNMP version 3, we urge you to use that and harden up those ports.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you for coming on the line, Dan. Does anybody have any last call for questions? I don't see any more. So I guess we'll wrap up with, definitely thank you for everyone for coming. I really hope that, you leave with some information that is actionable to, help you and your organization. In terms of the Amazon gift cards that we promised, and in terms of the no charge network assessments, we will be sending a survey after this, probably tomorrow. And so if you fill out the survey and then alert us to where to send the Amazon gift card to, as well as if you are interested in a network assessment, we will then get back to you with that information after the survey. And I did notice a few of you were on cell phones. So if we don't have your email address, feel free to shoot us an email over to marketing@usherwood.com, which I'll put in the chat. And we will get you a survey so that you can get your Amazon gift card and be eligible for the free network assessment. And one last question came in was this recorded? Yes, it was. We will also be sending that out in the email with the survey. So we'll send you all that information in there, and then feel free to respond to the survey if you have any extra questions, maybe that we didn't answer. And if not, I think that's all, unless the presenters have anything else to say.
Well, I just want to thank Laura for stepping up on short notice. We certainly hope David recovers quickly and completely. But thank you for stepping in on a couple hours notice this morning.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure to be here, and I too hope David gets better. But more than happy to support the topic. I think it's timely and important, and hopefully everyone came away with a little bit extra knowledge that maybe they hadn't thought about before. So much appreciated. Happy holidays, everyone, and thanks for having us.
Yep.
Great.
Thank you for everyone at Usherwood.